Hey everyone, welcome back to the Overseers. My name's Proilios and I'm joined as usual by my co-host Nightwing. In this episode, we'll be reviewing the LA Gladiators roster for Season 5 of the Overwatch League. In case you guys missed it, we've already reviewed the Atlanta Reigns roster in our previous episode, so do check that out. And comment down your thoughts on the LA Gladiators in the comment section so we know how similar your thoughts are to us. It's okay if they are different, but we'd love to know. Alright. Um, as usual, we'll be going through the tank line first, then the damage line, then the supports, and then the coaching staff, right before rounding things off with our final thoughts. So, Nightwing, do you want to start things off by walking us through the tank line?
Yeah, sure. So on tank, we've got Space, who's been with the Gladiators for a while now. And then we've got Reiner, who's coming in from Tier 2. He's played on American Tornado and Redbird Esports. Sort of similar to OG from who's now on the Atlanta Reign. They've had similar careers in the past few months. So he's, I think, a player that I'm looking forward to seeing on the big stage. I think he has impressed me in Tier 2. He's got decent flexibility, and I don't know, the team has just been doing really well. So uh, I think I'm fairly confident that Reiner is also a pretty decent pickup this year. I wouldn't say he's probably at the very top, but he's almost there. I mean, he was on a very successful team. And obviously, Space is just incredibly consistent. He keeps improving as well. Uh, he's got a better mentality now than he did before. Uh, and that you could really see that develop through the 2021 season, especially with the coverage given by DP through different interviews. I think Space is a good rock for the team to sort of rely on, and Reiner is a good addition to sort of round out the hero pool that you'll need for Overwatch 2. So I think the tank line is in good shape.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty good tank line as well, because naturally, with Space already having played with three other players on this team last year, um, he's carrying forward some of that synergy, which is definitely going to be an advantage going into a completely different game this year. And he's a really safe player to bet on, right? Because he's always been a really competitive off tank. His D1 and Sigma play especially are really good. And what I appreciate about Space is that he's very team oriented. He does not try to be the hero all the time, but can still make nutty plays when required. So, a very balanced player and a very balanced personality as well, and a leadership figure for the Gladiators. And to complement him, although not simultaneously because it's Overwatch 2, is Reiner, who is a really flexible and I would say talented main tank coming in from NA contenders. He just completely dominated NA with American Tornado for a year before moving on to Redbird Esports and helping them be a top tier team as well. So I believe he'll be very competitive in season 5 and his flexibility helps him be a good substitute for Muse, who was the Gladiators main tank last year. Although I think Muse was just like the right, like the perfect piece of the puzzle for the Gladiators, and Rhino might have to take a bit of effort to get to that level, but I still think he's really good and rounds off the tank line nicely. So I mean, I'm still a little bit puzzled that the Gladiators declined Muse's team option because he was flexible, mechanically skilled, and a super smart main tank player. And he played a big part in the Gladiators' success last year, and also proved to be one of the biggest pickups for the season. And he's probably the strongest free agent going into this off season. I don't know if that's a hot take, but I think he would have been a hot commodity going into the off season. What do you think, Nightwing?
I mean, I'm not sure I would say he's the hottest free agent considering how many players have changed teams, but he was definitely a good addition to the Gladiators roster and definitely performed better than their previous tank in OG. So I think the Gladiators have still made a good pickup, and it may just be that like trialing and seeing Reiner's potential didn't make the new head coach face realize that Reiner might be the right fit for the team. So I'm not really sure. And Muse was good, but I'm holding out some hope for Reiner to kind of maybe even exceed that.
Mm-hmm. And okay, let's move on to the DPS line then. And let's start things off with LA Gladiators veteran kevster, who is just an absolute god tier flex DPS. He's just incredibly smart, mechanically talented, and a very smart DPS player. He just, I mean, I would describe his tracer gameplay as kind of ASMR tracer gameplay because it's just so satisfying to watch. He's very clean with movement. He sticks pulse bombs like it's nobody's business, and he's just a formidable DPS player. His Echo and May are amazing as well. Like not only mechanics wise but also game sense wise. His copies are really effective. His May walls are perfectly placed, and I just think he is like probably like a top three flex DPS going into this season. Yeah, Nightwing, you can share your thoughts on Kevs as well.
Yeah, I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head there. I think Kevster is probably one of the strongest parts of this team. And is definitely the best DPS, I think, on the team because while ANS and Patiphan do sort of show some promise, Kevster just kind of knocked it out of the park last year, especially. Uh, he was great on high ping and he was even better on low ping.
Who would have
And
thunk
I
it?
think, yeah, I mean, uh, so he's sort of like the fielder of DPS in that sense, I guess. Um, but yeah, Kevster, I think, is someone I will be keeping my eye on most of the time, just because his play is so exceptional. Uh, but I do hope that his other DPS is able to complement him, whether it be ANS or Patiphan. That's my main concern, really.
Yeah, and do you also want to share your thoughts on Ans, whom we've seen in the
Yeah.
Overwatch League before?
I mean, ANS is one of my favorite players, just because I'm just sort of a Widow simp. Uh, I do absolutely adore the way ANS plays Widow. Um, that said, I do think that he is still lacking in the flexibility department. The most flexibility he's shown is a little bit of Sombra and a little bit of Tracer, but it's not world beating by any stretch of the imagination. Um, that said, what ANS is good at is the hit scans, the snipers, the Cassidys of the world, but and hopefully that will be enough to complement Kevster. Um, but yeah, I think ANS is sort of very clear in what he can do and what he can't do. When you try to put him on things that he can't do, then you just sort of suffer as a team, I think.
Yep, I agree, and I mean you can say because of this he is still a pretty good hit scan player, but like we saw last year, right? He retired temporarily from Overwatch, went to Valorant, I believe, and then came back, joined the San Francisco Shock, and he had a bit of a quiet year because he didn't get the chance to play all those sniper heroes that he's so good at because the meta didn't favor it, and because of that, it's hard to kind of put a label on how valuable he's going to be going into Overwatch 2 because we don't really know how things are going to look. But we know for sure that if it's a pure aim based, like if the meta favors pure aim, then Ants is going to dominate. Whereas if it favors more of these high mobility heroes where you have to multitask and have like multiple mechanics to handle at once, he might not be as good. But we'll have to see how he compares to someone like Birdring who retired from the stream and from professional Overwatch, but is still present as a content creator um, for the Gladiators. But yeah, I think that's all we have to say about him. Really, I don't think there's any Overwatch League fan who hasn't watched Answer's gameplay at this point. So we'll assume that you know the remainder of what we would like to say. Um, all right, let's move on to the final piece of the DPS puzzle, that is Patiphan. Now, Patiphan is a flex DPS player that had unretired, that retired from Overwatch and has recently unretired and joined the LA Gladiators. And for those of you who don't know him, he had been grinding in contenders, EU, and Pacific contenders for more than 2 years. And he was very flexible. Like, he used to fill in the hit scan as well as the projectile roles for whichever team he was on. So he should be a great asset going into Overwatch 2. And even though he may not be top tier on every hero, he will still likely be very competitive in the Overwatch League. And I'm super hyped to watch him. What about you, Nightwing?
Yeah, I think Patiphan is definitely going to be something to really just look at, because uh, he was quite excellent when he was playing, but he was obviously underage at that point. He did well despite the lackluster of the rest of this team in the World Cup, even. Uh, and he did also do quite well in Valorant. He also played on WGS Phoenix for a little while in contenders, and that team ended up winning. So uh, I think Patiphan still has it in him to sort of show his stuff in Overwatch, despite the breaks and the underage requirements that he's had in the past. Uh, it's just a question of whether he is at the same caliber as the rest of the team, which I do think is excellent. Uh, is he going to be enough to complement Kevster? Is he going to be able to use the resources afforded to him by his tanks and supports? I don't really know. I mean, it's something that you'll have to sort of find out as the league progresses, I think.
Yeah, fair enough, fair enough. And I think let's move on to the support line then, which is a doozy, honestly. So they've got FunnyAstro, Shu, and Skewed. Now, we have seen two of these players play for the Gladiators last year. And I think let's start things off with Shu, who was kind of the star support for the Gladiators last year. Simply because he was one of the most versatile flex supports in the league and showed really aggressive and mechanically skilled Batiste gameplay. Like, if you watched him, he was literally like a third DPS on the roster. Because whenever he was playing BAP, he would just heal when his team required it, not just spam heals for the sake of it like some other flex supports, but he would genuinely just focus on dealing damage. And his team would play according to that because they knew that if you give this guy space, he can get solo kills for the team. And that's why he got so many clutch moments last year as well. So I'm just really impressed by this guy and do believe he's going to be very competitive even going into this season. And yeah, Nightwing, you can share your thoughts on Shu as well.
Yeah, I mean, Shu is just a crackhead. I mean, this guy, he he is in my eyes at least a contender for the best Batiste in the league at the moment, and also in my eyes, he's probably the second best Ana after Twilight, and really nobody else. His mechanics are insane. His positioning is insane. He can make insane plays that you just don't expect many a time. And if you try and watch Shu's Ana versus literally like any other players, uh, especially like mid or like low tier players in the Overwatch League, such as Bebe, it'll feel like you're just watching a different hero or a different game being played. He's just that good. And yeah, I think Shu is going to be another one of those very, very reliable players who do have quite quite often they'll have these insane sort of pop-off moments. I think that's something that the Gladiators will rely on quite a lot. Uh, and this is one of the reasons I think the Gladiators will be one of the strongest teams in the NA region, and potentially even the strongest. Uh, Apart from my one singular concern about the other DPS, apart from Kevster, I think players like Shu and players like Kevster will just carry this team to a whole new level. I think Shu is a very integral part of that.
And do you also want to touch upon Skewed, since he was playing alongside Shu for most of last season?
Yeah, I mean, skewed comes in last year. Last year, people sort of just like bag on him for being from a relatively unknown team who didn't perform that well, but it's an insane scout from the Gladiators staff last year to find such a hidden gem to play Brig for them. He's probably the strangest. He's probably the support in the strangest position because he's only really a Brig specialist, and then there's a little bit of Mercy and a little bit of Zen thrown around here and there. But I mean, if it works, it works, and it clearly did last year, and I think that's going to continue into this year, barring some insane Brig changes that just render Skewed useless. But I do think he's a good player, and he'll figure it out. I think these two will make a good support line by their own, but the third player that we have is also just as insane. So, do you want to talk about him?
Sure. So the Gladiators have signed FunnyAstro, and it's quite interesting because they signed him as a substitute for Moth, whose team option they actually declined. I mean, this is absolutely bonkers, right? Because Moth, if you talked about him a year or so ago, he was one of the most legendary main supports. I still believe he's really talented, but I mean, when you've got Funny Astro instead of him, you really can't complain either because Funny Astro is like a goated Lucio player, stepped up massively with respect to his Brigitte play last year, and also plays a really good Mercy as we've seen, especially down in contenders. So I think mainly the team wants a main support that can make plays in this Overwatch 2 5v5 kind of setup rather than someone with more team oriented gameplay, which will be less valuable with less teamwork in Overwatch 2. That said, I mean, Moth is still a championship experience main support, and I'm sure that people like teams still have him in the back of their mind somewhere. But Funny Astro, like, he's a well-rounded main support and will be great in situations where a support may have to play Brig plus another main support hero, because if it's Brig only, we will probably see skewed instead, unless, like Nightwing said, she goes through major changes. But yeah, I think the rotation, the support rotation will be like Shu will be the constant, and then if it's a Brig focused comp, it'll be skewed. Otherwise, it's going to be Funny Astro. So it'll be interesting to see how these things play out. Um, but yeah, any further thoughts about the supports, Nightwing, or should we talk about the coaches a bit?
I think you bringing up the fact that Moth wasn't signed for this season. That's an interesting point to make because as you saw last year, he wasn't really given that much playtime. It was mostly just something like a bad Brig being played or something along those lines, Ana Brig, etc., etc. Moth didn't really get to see his potential explode even further, and hopefully he can find a good team. But I do think that Funny Astro might just be a better fit for this team. I personally feel like Funny Astro is a little more aggressive and just works a little bit better with the kind of attitude that the LA Gladiators play with.
Mm-hmm.
That's all really.
Yeah, I think you make a good point there because the Gladiators have, at least as of late, not been a passive team. They've always been a very proactive team when it comes to setting up plays or with ult usage. So I see where you're coming from there. Um, and yeah, I think let's quickly touch upon the coaching stuff. Um, because after 4 years with DP, the Gladiators have finally changed their head coach to Face. And Face was the assistant coach for the Gladiators since 2020, and he did spend a couple of years learning from Deepe. And even though I don't know what the players have to say about him, I have faith that he'll be able to strategize well for the team. So it's generally a positive outlook. And they've also got Unter and Smash joining the assistant coach positions. And with Unter, I think it's safe to say that he's going to be a good pickup because he's got a good track record in the Overwatch League. He was with the Valiant in 2020 and with the Rain in 2021, and both the teams had good seasons while he was on the in their coaching teams, right? So he's very well respected within the owl community, and that's a testament to how influential of a coach he is, even though he's not at the head coach position. And there's also Smash. Like, I don't know much about him, but he is a Korean coach that was with O2 Blast this past year and won 2 seasons of contenders with them. So I have high expectations from him coming into the Gladiators roster this season. Um, any thoughts on your end, Nightwing?
I think it is interesting that they finally swapped out Deepe and put in Face as the head coach. I think one of the reasons may just be that I think Deepe did find it hard to sort of find his own coaching style and see what worked, because uh, many a time he would appear in some sort of video or interview and say that, this tournament we're going to try more player-led coaching, and this tournament they're going to do exactly what I say. They're going to play the comps that I tell them to. And I think Deepe just sort of got lost in the sauce in that sense. And that may have just been one of the reasons that he got replaced, because many times you would see that the Gladiators would consistently have insane talent every single season, but they didn't quite get as far as they should have. And many times the coaching was the section of the team that was blamed. And I think that may have been fair to some extent, because the team didn't really find its identity and find a workflow that sort of worked best for the team, because DP kept switching it up just to see what works. But yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see how Face now handles this team, how he manages player emotions, how he manages uh, to keep players like Space on the right track with a good mentality. Um, it's something that I'm curious about, because obviously the things you have to do as a head coach versus an assistant coach are quite different. I think assistant coaches are more uh, are less holistic. Basically, it's more about finding certain comps, how to play those certain comps. Whereas as a head coach, you do also have to sort of manage uh, how your entire team's morale is, how your team communicates with each other. I think it's going to be interesting to see how that really works out with Face. I'm hoping it's for the better, but I don't really know.
Yeah, I think with such a talented roster, it's going to be a bit easier for Face as well, because he's worked with at least four of these players before. But naturally, with the new pieces and with an entirely new game that he has to coach, it's going to be a challenge for sure. So, all the best to the team. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it for our thoughts. Any general opinions about the Gladiators you want to throw out there, Nightwing, before we round this off?
I think they should honestly be one of the best teams in NA, if not the best. Uh, they just have to figure out how to make the team work together. I think how to integrate the new pieces properly, and I think they're well off to the races to be one of the best teams for season 5.
Yeah, I do think that all, I mean, not all their players, but their roles are really, really good overall. So I don't see any uh, obvious weakness in the roster. So I think it's just going to be a matter of execution and how these players synergize together. So it's going to be fun to watch, that's for sure. Because I mean, I feel like all of these players at some point in their careers have been super entertaining to watch. So I think it's going to be like, even if there are games late at night for the Gladiators, I'm going to wake up just to watch these players playing live because they are so fun. Um, like as fun for me to watch as a viewer. So yeah,
Yeah,
go on.
especially if you consider that uh, Overwatch 2 is going to be a new game, and so a lot of it is going to depend on these uh, fun pop-off moments more than general positioning. And um, it's not like the teams have just downloaded the entire playbook already, because it's going to be a newer game. So many of these players are very mechanically inclined, and they do prefer these pop-off moments instead of being very passive. So just imagine a game where you get to see Shoe pop off, you get to see Arns pop off, you get to see Space hit big diva bombs, you get to see Kevster on that tracer, um, and Reiner hitting big shatters. It's going to be really interesting to see uh, how that really works out.
Yep, definitely. And I think on that note, we can end this video. Thanks to anyone who's been watching so far, and we hope to see you in our next video as well, which we'll be uploading soon. So, bye bye. Have a nice day.